welcome to Diamond Delight Edibles. My name is Liz, if this is the first time you're joining, and to the regular subscribers, thank you so much and welcome back. New subscribers, thank you again for joining. I'm so excited. This channel has kind of weirdly taken on a life of its own, and it's really exciting, but and a little overwhelming, I'm not gonna lie. It's kind of cool when there's like a couple thousand people seen it, but now we're getting into some not large numbers for me that I never expected, and it's like but it's super cool, and thank you guys so much. I couldn't do this obviously without you. So today, I know I've got other gummy recipes up there, and I'm always working to refine and make things better. So in this recipe, this is good for regular gummy bears or regular gummy candies or the sweet and sour. There's really only one difference in the change for that recipe, whether you want to make regular or the sugar coated. And so I wanted to go over that, as well as a little bit of change in the method. But any one of those recipes will work. So kind of how I would list it is, the regular gummy bears that I put is more like a condensed jell-o. Realistically, it's jell-o and gelatin, and you harden it up, that's condensed jell-o. And then the other candy, the sour one with the sugar-coated sour ones, they're more like a real candy. So I now also have the gummy that's more like a real candy versus just condensed gelatin. And I will stop babbling on now. And also I've got a recipe at the end there if you want to stay tuned on how to make inverted sugar, which is a replacement for corn syrup. So if corn syrup is difficult for you to get, expensive, just not available in your local grocery stores, you can actually make your own at a fraction of the price, and it's super easy to make. However, it is very finicky, but I go over all of that at the end there about the inverted sugar. So I hope you stay tuned for that and check that out. And I think that's all I've got for us right now. I'm gonna get in, as I usually do, get into my ingredients, the utensils you're gonna need. We'll put everything together and we'll get some candies made. Before getting started, what you want to do is to get a pot of either ice water or set up a pot of cold water and put it in your fridge or freezer about an hour before you want to start this. It's very important. You need the really cold water to stop the cooking process for the syrup. So just get that set up ahead of time. And now we'll get into your ingredients and the tools that you're going to need. Alright, so I'm just going to go over the ingredients. Now the ingredients for the gelatin side are exactly the same whether you want to do the regular or whether you want to do the sugar coated. It's exactly the same. The only difference in whether you're doing the sugar coated or the regular is in the candy syrup, and the difference there is if you're doing sugar coated, you're going to use 1 cup of sugar. Actually, I'll go over that when I get into the sugar part. You never mind about that right now. We'll start with the gelatin side. So you're going to need 1 box of jell-o, 3 envelopes of gelatin or 3 tablespoons. You are going to need a 1/4 cup of corn syrup, or you can use what's called inverted syrup, which is a substitution for corn syrup. I have a video at the end of this to show you how to make your own inverted sugar, which I use quite often, which I'm actually using today. I'm just showing you the bottle for what you need in the light corn syrup. You will need a 1/4 cup of melted Cannabutter, a 1/2 teaspoon of Gore gum, a 1/4 cup of liquid. Now I tend to use the Kool-Aid jammers or the Kool-Aid waters. They're great, or the Hawaiian punches are great to use as well. Or you can just use water. You're going to want a 1/2 cup of liquid. Again, you can use your juice or your gelatin. Your juice or your water for the gelatin. And for this, it needs to be cold. So for your gelatin, it has to be very cold. And for our jell-o portion, we're actually going to boil that. And the only other thing is, if you want to add some additional color and additional flavor, we can do that as well. And I think, and we also need a 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid. I apologize, almost missed that. Our 1/2 teaspoon of citric acid. That's everything that we're going to need for our gelatin side. And now I'm just going to, when we start the syrup, I'm going to go into the ingredients in that for the syrup side. And then if previously I talked a little bit about clear gel for the regular gelatin gummies, you can actually use this now for either one. And again, we're going to do all the work on our gelatin side and add this in. So with regards to the clear gel, if you want to use it, what you need to do beforehand is you take a cup of the clear gel and you mix it with a 1/4 cup of sugar, and you keep that to a side. Mix it thoroughly so that the sugar and the starch are thoroughly mixed. The reason for that, the starch will clump. If you do it on its own or it doesn't have the sugar properly mixed, the starch will clump up in your mixture. So that is why we add the sugar. Then you are going to use 2 tablespoons for your gelatin mix. Now this is an option. Now what this does is it takes your candy to that next level, that more professional candy like you get in the candy store. So it's not as gelatin like. It's a little bit softer. It's more of that gummy candy versus just like concentrated gelatin. And I've been using this ever since I tried it. I use it in all my candy now. I love it. It's not that expensive. You get a large container of it, and it lasts quite a long time. So if you do make candies more on a larger scale or on a professional level, you might want to give that a try. It's excellent. It's a little bit of pain to work with, but I'll go over all that, adding that in. So for the candy syrup, you're going to need 1 cup of sugar. Okay, sorry, let me back up here. If you are making the sugar-coated gummies, you are going to use 1 cup of sugar and 1/2 cup of corn syrup. If you want to make regular gummies that are not sugar-coated, you're going to switch that. You're going to use 1 cup of corn syrup to 1/2 cup of sugar. Bleh. To 1/2 cup of sugar. So the recipe is exactly the same. This is the only part that'll change. Regular gummies, 1 cup of syrup to 1/2 cup of sugar. Sugar coated gummies, 1 cup of sugar to 1/2 cup of corn syrup. And the water remains the same, 1/2 cup either way you go. That's all you need for the candy syrup side. Temperature cooks to the exact same. We're going to cook it to 260. Alright, so the equipment that we are going to need is a double boiler. If you don't have one, no problem. Just what I do, use a metal bowl that fits into a pot. You want to add water into the bottom to the pot. You just don't want it to touch the bottom of the bowl. You're going to need a second pot for your syrup. You want to use a heavy bottom pot. It works, it's better for even heat distribution for your syrup. That way your syrup cooks evenly. You don't have any hotter spots. You're going to need a candy thermometer, a hand blender, a whisk, a couple of spatulas, and a strainer if you've got one handy. And I think that's everything that we need for our equipment. I usually end up finding something else that we need, but this is generally the majority of the equipment that you're going to need. So next I'll get into the ingredients for putting our gelatin portion together, and then we do the candy syrup, and then we combine both of them. All right, so give me a moment to get everything together here, and we'll get started. All right, so let's get started with our recipe. So our very first step, what we're going to do is our 1/4 cup of liquid, we're going to heat up in the microwave for 1 minute. We want that boiling. Then with our 1/2 cup of cold liquid, we're going to bloom our gelatin. So add that to a bowl and your gelatin. You want to evenly spread it over your liquid, and again, water or the juice. I'm actually using Kool-Aid jammers. Or sorry, I'm using the Kool-Aid waters. Now, if you do use real juice with real fruit, all you need to do is to add a mold inhibitor. Lorraine's makes one, and that's what you need to use if you use anything with real fruit in it. Otherwise, they will mold very quickly. But if you use fruit jammers, Hawaiian Punch, they don't have anything real in the sugar content. They don't go moldy. I literally have gummies that last for months. I've never seen mold on them. So with regards to your gelatin, you want to sprinkle it evenly and then mix it up to make sure that there are no lumps. And then you're going to set it aside for 5 minutes to allow it to bloom. And meanwhile, I'm going to microwave this for 1 minute. So you're going to add your box of jell-o to the double boiler. You're going to set your temperature to low, and we're just going to wait for, I'm just waiting for my liquid to boil. Alright, so we're going to add our boiled liquid. Yeah, it got very hot. Hot, hot, hot. Going to add that in. And we're going to stir that around, let our jell-o get dissolved. You might need to add a little bit more liquid to it if you find that it's not fully dissolving. But it takes a few minutes anyway. And you want to continue to scrape all the gelatin off the sides, otherwise it will harden up. And we're just going to stir that and let our water get warm. Now, it's really important with jell-o and gelatin is the heat. Jell-o or gelatin, sorry, I apologize, our unflavored gelatin melts at a hot water bath. If it is too hot, it breaks the gelatin, and what'll happen is you'll notice it'll start to get very foamy. If it starts foaming, immediately remove your bowl from the heat and let it cool down. You also may need to add about a half a tablespoon more of unflavored gelatin, because you've kind of broken you've broken the gelatin a bit, so it may not be as sticky, or it may not be, sorry, gel as well. So you may need to add in an additional half a tablespoon to compensate for that. So I'm just going to continue to stir this on the low heat until it is till it's pretty much fully melted, until the sugar is all fully melted. So now that my gelatin is pretty much melted, we're going to add in our 1/4 cup of corn syrup. Whee! And get that thoroughly stirred in. And we're also going to add in our half a teaspoon of citric acid. And we're going to let that all mix in and melt together. Again, try and keep the sides of your bowl as clean as possible. So now that our jell-o is all melted, we're going to add in our gelatin. And your gelatin is bloomed when it is nice and spongy. If it is squishy at all, then either your gelatin is not strong enough, because gelatins do have different strengths, or it's old and the gelatin's just broken. So you want it to be nice and firm. And then just break it up into pieces and scoop it in. And then we're just going to stir that until that's melted. And again, remember, you just want a warm hot water bath at this point. You don't want the water underneath boiling at all, otherwise your gelatin will break. And again, if you see it starting to foam up at all, take it off immediately. Now, once your gelatin is all melted and everything looks nice like so, we're going to add in our Cannabutter. So you can add in 1/4 to 1/3 of a cup of Cannabutter. I'm doing 1/4 cup. I have dogs and cats behind me. Meow. Cat's trying to trip me up here. And then add in the Gerber gum. This is when you want to use a strainer. Throw it on there, and you want to evenly sprinkle it all over the top. And now we're going to get our handy dandy hand blender. And so you're going to blend this until it is completely all one color, all one texture, and that you're not seeing any kind of oil separation. Alright, so we've got that all what we called emulsified. So what gum is an emulsifier. What an emulsifier does is it allows oil and water to come together. Essentially it creates a little bubble. So when we use the blender, it breaks the oil particles up into tiny little pieces, and the emulsifier acts as a bubble and holds the water and the oil together in little bubbles. That's how it all comes together, and your water and oil live happily together. Otherwise your butter is going to separate and come to the top if you don't use that. Now a lot of people have asked me if you can use xanthan gum. No, you cannot. It is not an emulsifier. It is only a thickening agent. So guar gum is an emulsifier. It is also a thickening agent and a stabilizer. That is the other. You can use lecithin. I prefer guar gum because lecithin gives it a flavor that I really don't like, and I find that the guar gum works awesome with you don't need the lecithin. Now at this point, if you want, you can add in your some additional flavoring. I add in about 1.5 cups full. And if you want to add in some additional color, I do it on this side as well. I use the no taste red if I'm doing red colors, so I'm doing raspberry. So I use the no taste red. Reason for that, red dye has red food coloring. Tends to have a bitter flavor to it. So I like the no taste red. The only downfall about it is you don't get quite as an intense red as the regular ones. But I'd rather give up a little bit of the color than the flavor. So I'm going to mix that in, and I'm going to use the hand blender again just to get it all mixed together. The color comes out much nicer when you use the hand blender. Because when you're adding the clear gel, you're going to want to have your whisk ready, and we're going to add in a tablespoon at a time, and you want to evenly spread it over the top like so, and then use this and then you're going to have to whisk it for about a minute or two. You're going to notice it start to thicken up. It's just kind of like cornstarch. You know, when you're making gravy, you have to keep mixing it for a little while for it to thicken up and do its thing. So we're going to mix this well, and you can see how it's starting to thicken up. And now we're going to add in the second tablespoon. Same thing, evenly over the top. Whisk. And you're going to repeat the same thing. We're going to whisk it for about a minute or two until it's thickened up. And so you can see how it's thickening up here. And so you want to continue whisking for about 2 minutes. And it should look nice and smooth. And again, all one uniform texture and color. All right, that side is ready, is finished. Now we're going to do the candy syrup side. All right, so for our candy syrup side, because I am doing sugar sour coated ones, I am going to be using 1 cup of sugar, half a cup of corn syrup, and half a cup of water. Now remember, if you want to make regular gummies, our only difference is you're going to use a cup of corn syrup and a half a cup of regular sugar. That is the only difference there. You're going to mix that together until it comes together. And your sugar begins to dissolve. Make sure to go all around the edges because the sugar likes to hide on the edges. Alright, so once you have that all mixed up, you're going to turn your heat on to medium high. And you're going to continue to stir this until it begins to boil. Once it begins to boil, you're not going to stir it. Alright, one of the things I forgot is you want a pastry brush or a paintbrush. Clean paintbrush so that you can clean off the sides of the pot. Use a cup of hot water and that'll melt any sugar crystals that you've got. And you want to get those off the side because any sugar crystals can cause your syrup to crystallize later on. And just continue to stir it until it begins to boil. Well, once your syrup begins to boil, stop stirring and you're going to add in your candy thermometer and we are going to cook this until 260. Now, if you want a firmer candy, you can cook it to about 280. So anywhere between 260 to 280, you can experiment on your firmness. If you want a softer candy, cook it to 250. But I found 260 seemed to be a really good temperature for it. And we're just going to let that go until we hit the proper temperature. Now you also want to get your pot of cold water handy. And the only thing that you'll do during the cooking process is if you do see any sugar crystals form, just wash them down. And now while your while the candy syrup is cooking, you just want to periodically stir this because stir your jell-o side because the top part of it's going to start to solidify and the bottom's going to be liquid because it's closer to the heat. So you want to make sure to mix that up and that it all stays nice and smooth. And keep it on low temperature so you have the low hot water bath, keeping it melted. Alright, so I've hit 260. Take your pot and submerge it in cold ice water. Turn off your heat. And you want to wait until the temperature begins to come down on your thermometer. Then you're going to place it on the counter until the temperature hits 240. Once your temperature reaches 240, you can remove your candy thermometer. And we are now going to add in our gelatin, or our jell-o and our gelatin mixture. Alright, so now we're going to get our jell-o, we're going to get that added in. And then you're going to very carefully stir this until it is fully mixed together. Your sugar, the sugar syrup, and the gelatin come together. But be very careful because this is very hot. And you're going to pull it from the bottom. And again, make sure to get the edges. And then this is up to you. It's an optional step. I like to use the hand blender on it. And the reason I like to use the hand blender is just to make sure that everything is all mixed and blended thoroughly together. Whoop, see, like that. Be careful. All right, I'm going to clean up my little mess here, and then we're going to let this sit, let some of the air bubbles come out of it. You can work them out by just gently stirring it. Let it sit, and then just gently stir it again. We need this to cool down a bit, so you can do that. And I'm just going to clean up those. All right, so my mixture is cooled down a bit, and I'm going to pour it into my bottles, my squeeze bottles. That was one of the things I forgot in the utensils or tools you need is your squeeze bottles or eyedroppers. And I use these squeeze bottles. They're by Sweet Sugar Bell, and they're nice because they've got the piping tips for them, which makes it really nice and easy, as well as they have a wide bottle and a wider thread. If you use bottles that have too thin of a thread, if your syrup is hot or really thick, it'll pop the top right off. After you've filled your bottles, if you still have syrup left, just keep it on the lowest temperature, just so that it'll stay melted there. Otherwise, it will solidify. All right, so now we're going to get ready to put this into our molds. All right, and then when you're filling up your molds, you just want to fill them just a little over halfway. You don't want to go all the way to the top, because that way it makes a rough edge on them, and it makes your candies not very nice. So you just want to try and make them as clean as also you want to try not to get any jell-o on the edges there. And you're just going to fill up all of your molds. And then once you've got them all filled, you're going to put them into the refrigerator for a minimum of 4 to 6 hours. I found it's best overnight. So if after 4 hours or so you go to try to take them out and they're not coming out, just leave them for overnight. That usually works. If they're still not going to come out of the molds, you can put them in the freezer. It means that you've got too much syrup. The gelatin isn't working too well. What you can do is put them into the freezer, get them out of the molds, remelt them, add about a tablespoon of gelatin, and recast them. And then if you find that you take out your candies and they're far too gummy, too sticky, you can remelt them and add a little bit of liquid to it. It means that it has too much gelatin. So you can add about, I'd probably say about 2 or 3 tablespoons of liquid to it, remelt it, and just recast them. And this recipe makes about 60 candies. If you use smaller molds, and if you use those little tiny bear molds, you're going to get about at least 100 to 150. Alright, so these candies I had in the fridge overnight, and I made lemon yesterday. So you can see, now I have found that they are better if you leave them overnight than just leaving them for a few hours. And they'll come out, and you pop them right into your sugar sour mix. Now your sugar sour mix should be 1 cup of sugar to a half a teaspoon of citric acid. Don't use any more. Make sure to thoroughly mix it in, and that'll make a nice sugar sour mix. If you just want sugar, just use sugar. What I usually do is for the sweet ones, I will use a cup of sugar to about a 1/4 teaspoon of citric acid, just a little bit, because it brings out the fruit flavors. So you just mix them into your sugar, shake off the excess, and lay them on a rack with parchment paper to dry overnight. Now these guys also dry a lot quicker than the other recipe. And just pop them out. Now if you find that they're getting too sticky like this, you can put them back into the fridge. Because sometimes they do. When you leave them out and they get too warm, sometimes they get a little bit too sticky. So what I usually do is take out one mold at a time and do them. And that's it. You'll continue doing that until they are all coated. And just lay them out on the rack to dry overnight. And those are your sugar or your sugar sour coated candies. Your sugar soda, Cannabutter Gummy. And so I just want to go over also a couple of things with regards to molds. When you get if you get brand new silicone molds, what I recommend to do is to season them. So I use cooking spray. I spray it on, let them sit for 20 minutes, and then rinse them in hot water. I don't use soap on them again, but I want to rinse off all the excess cooking spray. And then that cures them, which is nice. I found that red silicone molds do not work well. For some reason, they're thicker and I can never get anything out of them. So I tend to stay away from red silicone molds. I found the blues, browns, and that work great, but red, does not work. So to make inverted sugar, replacement for corn syrup, you need 2 cups of white sugar, 1 cup of water, and a quarter teaspoon of citric acid. You're going to need a pastry brush or a clean paint brush, brand new one would be better, in a glass of hot water. We're going to need a pot. You want your pot to be super clean. There cannot be even a speck of dust or dirt in your pot because it will cause your syrup to crystallize. You want a spatula and your candy thermometer. That's pretty much all you need. So to get started, we're going to get started in just one moment. All right, so we're going to put in our sugar, our 1 cup of water, and our quarter teaspoon of citric acid, and we're going to stir that till the sugar begins to dissolve. And any sugar crystals that are on the side, you want to make sure to wash down. We'll do that in a minute. And if by chance you see anything in your sugar at all, any dust or any little particles whatsoever, make sure that they come out, because I said anything at all in your sugar will cause it to crystallize. And sometimes things happen. You get little dust or little pieces of stuff. And then wash down any sugar crystals off of the side. And then we're going to turn our heat on to medium high. You want to make sure that your pot is always in the center of the burner so that you're getting proper even heat distribution. That way your sugar is cooks evenly. And so we're going to continue to stir this until our syrup starts to boil. The moment it begins to boil, you're going to stop stirring it. Stirring once it starts boiling will actually cause your syrup to crystallize, and we need to avoid that at all costs. So just continue stirring until it begins to boil, and wash down, and in between keep washing down the sides of your pot for any sugar crystals whatsoever. Like literally 1 crystal will cause your syrup to crystallize. So although it's really easy to make, it is very finicky. When you're stirring, it's also very important to take your spatula and go right around the edge of the pot. The sugar likes to settle in on the edges, so you want to make sure that nothing's sitting, because otherwise if it sits to the bottom it will stick and cause you problems. So the reason why inverted sugar is so finicky and why one single crystal or dust will cause it to crystallize is because what we're making is what's called a super saturated solution. So I don't know if you remember science class. See, that science stuff does come back to you. If you made saturated solutions and super saturated solutions, where you add a saturated solution is where you have water and salt. You add salt to its maximum saturation point in its water. Once you go one crystal beyond that, it becomes what's called a super saturated solution. And that is what we're making here. Because we start out, first of all, with a saturated solution, the 2 cups to 1 cup of water, 2 cups of sugar to 1 cup of water, creates a saturated solution. By cooking off the water, we are now going to have more sugar content than your water, which then creates your super saturated solution. And there you go, science for the day. You've learned you're something new. You're done. Oh, sorry. One thing I did forget is you're going to need the lid for your pot. Mine, as you can see, this one is too big for it. If you don't have the right lid, no big deal. Just use them flipped over. They work just as good. So you definitely need the lid to your pot, because once we stop cooking this, we're going to put the lid on it immediately. Now, as soon as it starts to boiling, you're going to stop stirring it. You're not going to stir it anymore from this point on. You're going to add your candy thermometer, and we are going to cook the syrup to 234, between 234 and 237. If you want a little bit of a looser syrup, then 234. If you want it a little bit thicker, then 237, but you're not going to go beyond that. And the only thing now that we're going to do through the cooking process is wash down the sides if any sugar crystals form. That is the only thing you want to make sure. That's it that we're going to do through the process. So keep an eye on the thermometer. It goes fairly quickly. Don't walk away. Don't go be hitting the bong or anything silly like that. And as I said, as soon as it hits 234, you're going to wash down any crystals that may be on the sides, and then we remove it immediately from the heat. Place the lid on it and put it on your counter or a stone block. And you're not going to touch it again until it hits room temperature. It is very important that it doesn't get agitated or move in its cooling process, because any agitation, again, can cause it to crystallize. Now, if your sugar does start to crystallize at any point, not a huge deal. Put it on low heat, remelt it, and it should be fine. So as it's boiling, while it's boiling until all the sugar melts, the crystals can splash up onto the side. So as I said, just keep a very close eye. And if you've got, screws here, normally there's little bolts here on your pot where the handle, make sure to clean around there, because the sugar likes to hide in on those. And the sugar also will gather behind the thermometer, but I only tend to move that one time near the end of the cooking process. Because as I said, you don't want to be agitating your sugar at all. So when my syrup gets close to 229, 230 is when I will gently move the candy thermometer and wash the crystals off in and behind that. And then gently move it back. Alright, so my temperature's now at 234. I like to actually let mine go to about 237. I like it a little bit thicker. So at about 236 I'm going to pull it, because your sugar does still tend to continue to increase once you pull it off the heat. So we're at 235. $236. I'm going to remove the candy thermometer, turn off my burner, place it over on my back burner here because it's nice and cool. Wash off any crystals that may be there. for the last time. Be very careful. And then you are going to place your lid on it, and you're not going to touch the syrup again until it reaches room temperature. As soon as it reaches room temperature, you can use it. You can either store it on your counter, or you can put it in the fridge for up to 6 months. And the one thing is you can transfer it to another container. However, anytime I've ever done that, it ended up crystallizing. I guess the agitation of moving it from one container to another. So I just tend to leave it in the pot that I cook it in. So I always recommend, if you're going to do that, use a pot that's not your favorite, so that if it's off to the side for a couple of months, you're not going to miss it. So I basically designate one pot for my syrup, so I'm not going to miss that pot if I need it in the next couple of months. And that's it for inverted sugar, making your own corn syrup. So as I said, I use it quite often in place of my corn syrup. It's great if you do not have access to corn syrup easily, or like places in the UK that you really don't have corn syrup. You've got, I think it's called a golden syrup, I'm not sure. But now you can easily make your own. Well, I hope you enjoyed that little tutorial there on how to do your own inverted sugar. Thank you very much for watching. You have a great day. So that's my little tutorial there on regular gummies and sugar sour coated gummies. I hope you enjoyed that. As always, if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to put them in the comments. I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I do apologize. I do sometimes have a bit of a delay there. I don't mean to, but life takes over sometimes. But I do try to get back to everybody as I can. And then here's my little lemon, and I did lemonade kind of turned out like lemonade. So they're lemon and raspberry. And these are their little puppies. Aren't they cute? Well, good luck with your candy making, and I'd love to hear how yours turned out. And if you have any questions about the inverted sugar, let me know. And I hope you have an awesome rest of your day. Thank you so much for watching. And if you're new here and you like the video, I really do hope you subscribe. Take care. Have a wonderful, awesome day.